Thank you very much. This session is about House Bill 476. With the formation of the new Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors Board, I'll be moderating the panel. My name is Dan Dobry with Croy, and we're actually extremely lucky. I'm very thankful that we have board members, folks that represent you with the board to answer questions so that you're up to speed with an understanding of the functioning within the licensed world. So start with read the bios for our three distinguished panelists, and then we'll have a series of questions. We'll try to leave enough time at the end for questions from the audience, and then we'll wind up so that you have time to visit our vendors and get ready for the following session. With that, our first board member is Russ Pennington. What? Hey. Forgot that. Our first panelist is Russ Pennington. And specializes in infrastructure, regulatory, environmental, and economic development opportunities. Russ began his career as a consulting engineer before joining the Georgia EPD as the Director of Policy and Public Affairs. He later held positions of Deputy Director at the Georgia Environmental and Finance Authority, as well as the Director of the Governor's Water Supply Program. Russ's experience includes strategic consulting on large infrastructure development projects with involvement from conceptual planning through construction. He has assisted public entities as well as private groups, both technical and business project development, having worked in transit, highway, and logistic markets. Russ is a licensed professional engineer, a graduate of the University of Georgia with degrees in biological engineering and an MBA. Russ is a member of the UGA Alumni Association Board of Directors, the Georgia Conservancy Board of Trustees, and the Peachtree Road United Methodist Church. Russ and his wife Kelly have two daughters, Caroline, Eleanor, and he lives in Brookhaven. Our next board member and panelist is Darien Sykes. With over 25 of diversified management and structural engineering experience, Darien is not only a PE but an SC, President, Owner, and Managing Director of Sykes Consulting. As a structural engineer, Darien works as a leader and dedicated team collaborator. He ensures that project goals are understood and conceptual designs are well defined and executed throughout delivery. He identifies practical and elegant solutions, structural engineering challenges, and as a quality building design, and that a quality building design is delivered on time and within budget. This is pretty cool. Darien is proud to be the structural engineering firm of record for many projects such as National College Hall of Fame, New World of Coca-Cola, and the Airside Modernization Project at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. He's also provided structural engineering services for Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Indianapolis' Lucas Oil Stadium, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's Landside Modernization Project, and tons more. Darien earned his Bachelor of Science and Civil degree in civil engineering at Purdue University, a fellow Boilermaker, and his Master of Science in Civil Engineering at Georgia Tech. He has served on the Georgia Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors Board for 7 years and is currently the acting chairman of it. And our last panelist, by deduction, Taylor Wright is Vice President and Business Development Strategic Director for Atkins. With 30 years of experience in the transportation and infrastructure engineering industry, currently leads sales, marketing, and strategy for Atkins local and municipal clients in the U.S. In addition to his role with the company, Taylor serves as the national representative for the ACEC Georgia Board of Directors and chair-elect of the Georgia State Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors. Been a member of that board since 2016. Taylor has a degree in civil engineering from Georgia Tech Is licensed in Georgia, New York, Ohio, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Arkansas, Mississippi. Taylor's been married to Melanie for 22 years, and they have 2 daughters, Madison, 19, Sophia, 17. And in his spare time, he enjoys playing golf, fishing, and tackling those home projects.
Don, I'll try to speak loudly. So, first question I have for our board is, how is the board made up? How many members? How are you appointed? And what is the term that you serve on the Pels board?
I'll start out. Good afternoon. The board is comprised of 9 members, 6 engineers, 2 surveyors, and 1 consumer member. The 6 engineers are a mechanical engineer, a structural engineer, an electrical engineer, 2 civil engineers, and then 1 engineer that could be of any discipline.
And I'll take the easy part of the question. The terms are 5 years, and that may sound like a long term, but it takes probably at least 3 years to figure out what's going on. All 3 of us are serving our second terms on the board, and that's typical that board members serve multiple terms.
And the terms are set in kind of oddball times, and when you get appointed to the board doesn't necessarily attribute to when the term is set for. So Darien and I were sworn in together, but we came in about 1.5 years into a term. So at the end of our term, we were really just cutting our teeth and starting to realize what we needed to do. So, I mean, I think we've been there 9 years. You're right
8.
behind us at 8.
Yeah.
And then we've got a new surveyor that's maybe 2 years in. But other than that, I mean, and I would bet Elma Richardson's pushing like 18 to 20 years on the board. So it's been a pretty stable group.
And the one thing I didn't say, the appointments are made by the governor, in case you didn't know that.
Yep. The governor's office has an appointments director that covers a lot of their professional boards. And so, you know, when I got asked to be on the board, I actually was a state employee, and we had a regulatory issue where there were a bunch of falsifications on new landfill permits. And so kind of the theme of where we can go in this conversation and what y'all may have witnessed, EPD at the time had tried to report 13 falsifications. It went absolutely nowhere. And so the governor's office called me and were like, hey, we need somebody on the board and we want you to be that person. And honestly, the attorney general's office roadblocked that. It got nowhere, but it kind of led to the path that we've gone down for many years now.
So serving on the board, what would you say are your primary responsibilities?
One of the things we do is we review applications and make sure that engineers get licensed. We review disciplinary actions, and we set rules and policies for engineers.
Yeah, probably the hardest part of the job. The most time-consuming part is reviewing the applications, the continuing education audits, things like that. But the hardest part is presiding over disciplinary actions and making recommendations on disciplinary actions. That's not the fun part.
And then the rules and regulations component of it is, you know, as technology has changed, as COVID brought in a remote workforce type work environment, you know, engineering in general has changed. And so we've had to propose new rules and regulations to kind of keep up with it. So we've got digital plan stamps that we're looking at right now. We've got remote supervision has been an issue we've addressed. And so we're just really trying to stay current with where the industry is.
We recently also created a structural engineering license, and that was in response to what NCES stated as a model law for structural engineering. So as the profession changes, it's important for us to be able to understand what the current rules and policies are and adapt those as needed.
I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but it's been about a 15-year journey to get a separate Pels board. It just didn't happen 2 legislative sessions ago. It's been a long, arduous undertaking. Can you share with us the things that really precipitated or faced that challenge where you had support of ACEC and legislators to form the separate board? What were you dealing with?
Want me to take that one? Let me start. There's going to be we'll make some comments. I don't want it to be misconstrued. The staff of the Secretary of State's office worked very hard, and none of the comments should be interpreted as against the Secretary of State staff. But currently our staff, including the executive director, are spread across 7 boards. And some of those boards are not, we're engineers. They may be over, cosmetologists. So they're boards that don't relate. So it's a very difficult task for them to cover all the boards. And all 3 of us get calls weekly asking for help where somebody says, I've called, I've emailed, I can't get somebody to answer. I don't know what's going on with my application. I need to take the test. I'm about to miss the deadline. Those are the kind of issues that we want to address with the independent board.
Yeah, and you heard Taylor and Darien both say about what our roles and responsibilities are as board members. I don't necessarily think our responsibility as a board member is to do your general review of an application for approval to take a test. If it's a crazy circumstance where it's an international degree and you're trying to get consistency, that's one thing. Or if it's a foreign license, something that's just not normal, that's one thing to go to the board members. But we're dealing with issues that are routine daily things. And I mean, think that frankly, the profession deserves better treatment, and it goes right into looking at investigations. State hasn't had an investigator assigned to our board in at least 4 years. And so even when you have an investigator, what are they looking for? And there is, the normal investigator for the Professional Licensing Board division of the Secretary of State has a law enforcement background. And there's a real need to have that law enforcement background. You know how to go into a place, you know how to look for certain things from a due process standpoint, but they don't know what they're looking at. So when you look at like the number of survey complaints our board gets, and then, technical engineering complaints, they need some form of coupling. And I think that's ultimately what folks have given up on in terms of getting a response from the Professional Engineering and Land Surveying Board. And I think that's what we hope we can bring back, that we get a trust with folks and we can bring a safer profession, particularly with as much work as we all have right now.
Just to touch on that and take a step back. So our core values, we want to obviously protect the health and welfare of the community, the engineering community. But our core values, whether it's customer service, whether it's being responsive to complaints, whether it's getting engineers licensed, and also public outreach. We want to provide that service for our industry. And there's limitations, whether it's staffing, and then also financially. There's a budget for that kind of service. And then there's also administrative hurdles as part of the, underneath the Secretary of State. So this is the best approach. This is what the right thing that we found in order to accomplish our goal of protecting the health, welfare, property of our community.
So prior to this, you were under the Secretary of State, but now you formed a separate independent board. You didn't want to reinvent the wheel. How did you, did you model yourselves after? What was that process to find what you thought was the best board out there that Georgia could then implement as being the best board for our profession?
North Carolina has a very similar model. They have around the same number of engineers. They're licensed, they're independent, and so it created a good model by which we can develop a budget, and then the protocols and procedures that they've gone through. We reached out to other boards as well, but that was a really good model by which we utilized their experiences and researched them and spoke with them about the best practices for us to become.
But one of the things we didn't mention when we talked about our responsibilities on the board, our board is actually a voting member on the board of NCEES. And so we help make policy related to the testing. So all of us have been to NCEES conventions. We've interacted with other boards. We got a chance to see how other boards operate. There's a few boards that stand out. North Carolina was one very similar to us. I'd say Louisiana is another one. And we really leaned hard on professional organizations. ACEC kind of led the charge, reaching out to those boards. They actually got their budgets for us to use as examples, and we're using their staffing models and other things as examples as we go forward setting up our own board.
It's something we'll talk about as we go through this. We kind of feel like the focal point of what we need to do as a board is to get the software interaction right. So, it's not just going online and doing a simple renewal and paying it online, but if you let your PE license lapse, there's a fine associated with it to get your PE license back in order. You can't pay that fine online. And the fact that you can't in 2023, it is nuts that you can't do everything online. So we've talked to a lot of we've gone to Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, talked to a lot of the different boards about what's good and what's not good. And so we've kind of landed on a couple of different software licenses, which we think can be the platform for everything. That's your database, that's processing applications, it's the interface with the web services. We think all of that could be put together and actually just get back to just better customer service. And so we're actually going to interview a group next week when we have our board meeting, but that's been an extreme help for us to be able to talk about what's good and maybe more importantly, what's not good and what to avoid.
If you've actually tried to do anything on our website other than renew your license, it's very difficult. I even have a hard time finding things on our website. Our intention would be we develop a software and a website where you can do everything online.
We also created a task force that involved several professional organizations. We wanted to get feedback from our consumers as well. So things that as we were going through this process, we had a transparent process that, we received information, shared information, and got buy-in. So that was a really important, critical part of the process as well.
And we appreciate the opportunity today to get feedback from y'all too.
So where are we with the formation of the board with regards to establishing a budget, hiring staff, office space? What's the status? I know because you're not there yet.
So House Bill 476 passed in the 2022 legislative session. So it established us, but it established us with essentially nothing. So in terms of where the state works fiscally, they work on a fiscal year of July 1st to June 30th. So we're in the fiscal year 23 right now. There is an amended budget that is in the process. I believe it will be finalized tomorrow. And both chambers have $300,000 in for the licensure board in that amended budget. So that's really going to be like April through June. So it gets us started. And I think that would let us hire an executive director, let us execute a lease, let us start making a few computer purchases, and then hopefully procure the software component. The fiscal year 24 budget is really just getting started. It has not passed either chamber of the legislature. So I actually had to do a fiscal year or an appropriations request, which was, I guess, about a week and a half ago in front of the House. And then I have it Wednesday morning in front of the Senate. The governor's office kind of pulled a number out of thin air, which was $1,050,000 for the 24 budget. When we looked at North Carolina, they were very kind and gave us a detailed budget of like everything broken down from salary, fringe benefits to cars, computers, software, license, etc. It was $2.5 million. And so maybe we were a bit naive in the process, but our budget request went in at exactly where we thought we needed to be. And now we're kind of playing the cat and mouse game of where we're going to land. So given all the budget staff, as much detail as we could, we prioritized things. The number one priority is really based around customer service. So it's an executive director that we think is going to be a solid executive director, a deputy director to help, an admin to be able to answer all calls and emails that they receive, the software, lease, computers, et cetera. And then we kind of prioritized a couple of vehicles that we think investigators will need, additional investigators as we grow. But we're trying, I mean, honestly, we're at the mercy of the legislature right now. So I think we all feel that if we could get $2 million combined between the two appropriations, we're going to have a lot to work with.
It'll give us a good start. And I know we're going to get into the fees. I know that's probably what some people want to know about, but just understand that the budget was established and we backed the fees in to support that budget.
And ultimately, we're a public entity, right? So we have to publicly procure anything that we get. And that's why the task force has done due diligence on the software provider. And we want to be able to like figure out, you know, these three are who we would consider. And then I think we're going to be ready to hit the ground running with a procurement as soon as we know we have money.
That executive director position is really critical though, because a lot of what Russ was saying, that person will be in charge of, you know, procuring the rest of the staff and then getting organized and that sort of thing. So that's, I think, that's very high on the list of things.
As we prioritize, I mean, we've all discussed our priorities are based on return on investments for the registrants. We understand raising the fees. You know, we've got to provide the return on investment for that. So that's how our priorities are being set.
And honestly, that has actually been repeated directly to the legislators when asking for the appropriations from them. And that feedback has absolutely helped to be able to say, look, we had not raised fees as a board in 30 years. We're kind of in line with where other states are now, but if we had not done that, I don't know what we'd be operating with. And I don't know that we'd be any better off than we were in the Secretary of State's office, frankly.
You're a state board, but it seems like the engineering world revolves around Atlanta. How do you ensure that you're not Atlanta centric, that you're statewide? What is there anything new that will come in place, or you're already out there vastly, for example?
There's a couple of things that we can do. One is the board is comprised of board members from other regions, not just Atlanta. So there's an opportunity to get feedback and understand the landscape of what's going on in other regions around Georgia. But then also, like, we've traveled to had board meetings at different colleges. We'd love to, you know, we've gone to UGA and to KSU, but we'd love to go down to Savannah, but other locations and have an opportunity to reach and touch our community throughout the state. So that's important to us.
And I'll get into something that's pretty important to me. When you talk about being in front of the registrants, 90% of the licensed engineers are in Atlanta. So there's a discussion right now. Right now we're in Macon, and there's a discussion about where we should move. I'll speak for myself. I want to move to Atlanta, and I think three of us are in alignment there. One of the things that I don't like about our current board meeting is generally it's very perfunctory. We come in, do our business, and leave. There's not many people that show up at the board meetings. We don't have the technology to have a good online virtual board meeting. One of the ways that I can see about reaching out to the entire state is having a first-in-class conference room with AV equipment where, number one, we have room for people to come in, but also that we can put on a virtual meeting to where if you're interested in something, you can just join online, because we don't have that option right now.
And frankly, the board has made an attempt to get more and more newsletters out, and that has been a failed attempt. And we were talking on the way over here. I actually think there's no reason in the world that we couldn't give a 2-week notice on the listserv to all the licensed individuals with a link to provide access to all of our board meetings. And I mean, I just think from a transparency standpoint that you at least ought to have the option to be able to chime in and listen and participate.
Maybe you should tell them why it's been a failed attempt to get out the newsletter.
It's just been a little fight with the Secretary of State's
Yeah.
office about, there's a secondary level of approval above and beyond us as the board to get that.
I just looked at the newsletter that I think was drafted, a year ago that, has to be updated now. It never got approved for distribution.
One other thing that we were talking about too is thinking about and getting feedback from important things that you want to hear about. And in addition to what we're talking about in the board and our agenda, we may have a guest speaker, someone who comes in and talks about the industry as well. So we want to make it inviting. We want to make it easy for people to participate. And I think that if we can do that, then we'll be able to address that issue.
One of the things that I found interesting with our earlier conversations in preparation for today was the legal aspects, the judicial actions that could happen. Can you share with the engineers a little bit about how that might be involved in some type of legal action?
Well, I can start by everybody may not be aware, everything we do is governed by state law. The state law sets out all of the guidance that we follow. Every now and then, like Russ said, you have to update that, whether it's an example is the new digital ceiling that we're working on right now, which is just new. But anytime we make a new policy, a new rule, or propose a change to the law, we have to work with the state legislature to get that done. And it's actually got to be, anything we propose has got to go through the governor's office for approval.
Then when you get into like the investigations and looking into any wrongdoings and accusations, we have an attorney general representative that's assigned to our board. And I'll say so in the 9 years that we've been on, we're on our third attorney general representative. And I will say we got a big upgrade with our current one from our previous two. Max Changas is fantastic. I think we all feel the same. But like the second one we had, it's very much like the Secretary of State issues that we had. Kirsten was a perfectly good attorney, but she also served the nursing board. And if you followed any of the news on like nurses and how frustrated they've been in their licensure, she left our board because she's full time on the nursing board now and she couldn't handle anything else. But when Max came onto our board, Max has another attorney. He manages the entire licensure board support from the Attorney General's office. So when we have an investigation, Max can delegate that out to a guy that can actually see that thing the whole way through the court procedure or settling beforehand. But he's always there to give us good advice. And so there's that. And then if you look at other state agencies, oftentimes they will go around the Attorney General's office and they'll go hire private counsel to do take their actions for them. They're appointed as a special assistant attorney general or a SAG. And so depending on where we wind up in terms of what the state appropriates us in budget, I think we've got the option to, continue to hopefully use Max or go pursue some outside counsel that could maybe be more efficient.
One of the issues that recently came up too was the idea of decoupling. The fact that some people are taking exams prior to getting the experience and then coming back and then taking the exam, and how our laws and our policies align with that. So I know that from a legal standpoint, the question came up, what happens if somebody does not get it approved to take the exam after getting the record, what they consider to be the requisite experience. But those are sort of the legal things that we know of that are down the pipe that we need to be aware of.
In case you don't know, decoupling is when, and there's some states that allow this, you can actually take the test before you get your 4 years of experience, and then you get your license after the 4 years of experience. It's actually something we've discussed as a board, but right now the state law does not allow that in Georgia.
Two issues that you had mentioned, I thought were interesting is, and these I would imagine are sort of behind the scene things. There's groups out there that don't want to have licensure as an engineer. I've got the experience. I've done the project before. I don't need to be registered with the state. And there's also some folks that feel like if you're registered in one state, you should be registered in anywhere in the country. How difficult is it to deal with those types of not so much day-to-day issues that we have with design efforts, but that you deal with as a board?
Yeah, it's definitely something that's out there, and a lot of people are working on it, including professional organizations. For us, one of the ways that we combat that is through NCEES and serving on committees. And it's actually one of the things that we've talked about with an independent board to actually allow board members to seek leadership positions in NCEES and advocate for things that are important to Georgia. When you're talking about things like removing licensure, or creating a system where licenses, or you grant automatic comedy across the state. Well, there's some states that do things in ways that we don't want to do it here. So I would say NCEES is one way that we can work against those issues.
We had an issue where there was a requirement to take a 16-hour exam for structural engineers, but there was no distinction between who took the 16-hour exam and who didn't. NCEES has what they call a model law that says in order to be qualified to design certain types of structures, they gave a definition, and they said that the 16-hour exam is required. So we were able to lean on NCEES and then develop a law that distinguishes or that helps people understand who is qualified and who is not qualified.
But I will add, NCEES does some things really well, and then they have also let us down, and that can create some big problems. And so Darien mentioned the structural engineering model law. Well, every state's different. So we've looked at, when we first started talking about this, we were trying to figure out what's the solution we do without changing the law. So we did a rule change, and that's where the definition of designated structure came in. And honestly, a lot of that had to do with things we were hearing about GDOT, and bridge engineers were being thrown into the structural engineering category, and they were going to other states to get licensed. And then they would come back to Georgia and they couldn't get their license via comedy. So how do you fix that? And ultimately it came down to the law had to be changed. And, NCEES doesn't view everything, their analysis from their record keeping standpoint is not consistent across the country that way. We also talked on the way over here where we think the next step that may happen is international engineers. So whether it's a chartered engineer out of England or a PE&G out of Canada, they don't recognize those, and that's not part of their records unless you have gone through their certifications. They're going to look at your education and everything. But just with the amount of globalization that our industry is facing, I think that's a hot topic.
But it illustrates the importance of our getting a voice on NCEES, because we want to advocate for things that are important to Georgians and Georgia licensees, and not let the leaders from New York or California drive that discussion.
And frankly, decoupling goes right into there with that as well.
One of